So, the first thing I was going to speak about is why an understanding of the mind is helpful in somebody's life. And this is a really, really hard thing to do. So, before I came across the understanding of the mind that we'll be talking about in the conference, I honestly thought that the only thing you could do in life that would help you is get more knowledge, more skills, and try harder. I thought that it was all about how high you tried. And what I couldn't really understand is I knew I was relatively intelligent. At least I thought I was relatively intelligent. And if I'm not, I don't want to hear about it. But I couldn't understand why I struggled with things that were sometimes quite rudimentary, and I didn't make the progress for the effort that I put in all the time. And it wasn't until I started to realize that my mind was playing a bigger role than I realized, that actually everything I was doing, I was having to do with the use of my mind. And I don't mean the use of my mind as a thinking machine. I don't mean as an intellectual processor. We learn about that in school. We learn about that in university. But what we don't learn about is the very underpinnings of that processor has a dynamics that we're not aware of. So we go in and out of all sorts of different states of mind, and we become more or less crazy, more or less dysfunctional, more or less confused, more or less troubled. And without an understanding of the mind, I believe that that was to do with my circumstances. I now realize that it's actually the internal dynamics of my mind. And it's almost like the ocean. It's like, if you don't understand the currents of the ocean, it's a very dangerous place to be. So I was just traveling in Australia, and I was standing on the beach with some friends, and they could see riptides and I can't see riptides, and I've been caught in a riptide, and it's no fun. But if you can see them, you don't get caught in them. And if you understand them and you get caught in them, you know how to swim in them without tiring yourself out and drowning. Well, the mind's that way. If you cannot see the dynamics of your mind, if you don't know how to see them, you don't know how to relate to them in a healthy way, you get sucked in by them, and you can end up relating to them in very unhealthy ways that create chronic dysfunction. So if you look at your life, you'll see that you have certain patterns that don't work very well. And when most people see this is when they're struggling with them, and they're like, oh, what's wrong with me? Why am I always like this? How could I do better? Well, seeing these invisible underpinnings of the mind, that's how you get ahead of it. So the reason for getting a better understanding of the mind is you can avoid all the invisible negative traps that it's setting all the time, that most people are falling into all the time, that we all fall into some of the time. And you can really start to appreciate how to benefit from the power that your mind gives you to have clarity, to have well-being, to see to the heart of things in a productive way, to not get tricked by the distorted ways that we see things that get us confused and overwhelmed and into our dysfunctional habits. So most of the questions that I see people asking themselves in business, in their lives, in their relationships, there's an answer to all of them if you can see how the mind works, what it's doing, and kind of what's behind it all. So not only is it a very enabling thing to get a better understanding of the mind, I can't think of anything else that's more helpful. So if you have the question, well, what's the benefit of learning more about the mind? Think about anything you want to get done in your life, any experience you want to have more of in your life. The mind's playing a role, and if you don't know what it is, it might not be a helpful one. So getting a better understanding of the mind is key to everything, as far as I can see. But if you're not sure what I'm saying is right, then definitely come to the conference and check it out for yourself. And by the end of the conference, you'll know whether I'm just easily entertained or there really is some value to getting a better understanding of the mind. And if you're asking yourself, well, why would I come to this conference? In my mind, there's two reasons. The first one, because I am easily entertained, is that it's fascinating to step back from your life and see the dynamics of the mind in play, because we're always looking this way and we see the results of what our mind does. We're kind of at the effect of it. But stepping back and taking a look at the dynamics that exist for all of us that lead to the way that we behave, our level of clarity, what we're capable of, is just a joyful fascination that is just a fun thing to do. And in my experience, most people never do it. So to spend 2 days doing that is going to be an absolute pleasure. It might become your new hobby. It did for me. So that's why I'm not as fit as I used to be. I used to go to the gym. Now I kind of think about the mind, or I go to conferences and stuff like that. And the other reason is, if you come to one of these conferences and you listen to what's being said, you're definitely going to start to get an appreciation for what your mind's doing and what it's capable of, and how much easier to navigate it is than you believe. And as a result, without any effort, it's very likely, as you kind of take in a better understanding and you learn, that you'll be less victimized by your negative feelings. So, we all feel bad, we all have moods, but how much that gets under our skin, how much that weighs on us, how much that freaks us out, that changes. The more understanding you get, the less negative impact of moods you're going to get. You're also probably going to find that you realize you can feel better more easily, that higher levels of well-being and ease and fulfillment are kind of an effortless potential of the mind that is more available than we realize it is. And so in a way, when we look to feel better or we look to have a good experience, we're kind of trying too hard. But you would never know that if you didn't understand how the mind works. But once you do, you can't not know it. So it gets much easier. And also, you'll start to understand a lot of the patterns that exist in your life and other people's lives and your relationships. So you'll have the beginnings of an understanding that will make some of the important but complex things in your life simpler, like relationships. So before I had an understanding of the mind, relationships was the most complicated thing in life. And now it's probably the simplest. So there are all sorts of personal and professional benefits that you could reasonably expect to get from coming to the conference. And it should be enjoyable too. I would be shocked if it was dry and boring and intellectual, and I would be absolutely shocked. So I think it's going to be enjoyable. I think it's going to be hugely beneficial. And so I expect it will be time worth spent. No, like some learning events you go to and you don't actually enjoy them, but they're useful because you learn something. Well, I think this is going to be enjoyable and you're going to learn something, hopefully. So that would be the reason for going. I'm actually one of the speakers at the conference. And that's because I've spent the last 17 years doing nothing but teaching an understanding of the mind. I started in counseling, so working with individuals, couples, families, mediations, and then moved into working with organizations and businesses, and worked in education and nonprofits and with leaders and sales teams, etc., etc., etc. And the reason that I do that is because there is a whole new potential of life, of clarity, of well-being, of relationships, of understanding. So close, anyone can get it. And if you are living a life without it, you have this tremendous potential of the mind that you're living with but getting no benefit from. And to me, that's an unnecessary tragedy. It's a tragedy, but because we now have this understanding of the mind that eliminates that tragedy, it's an unnecessary tragedy. And for me, I go around the world talking about the 3 principles and how they help us understand the mind, because I literally feel like it creates a whole new platform in people's lives, a whole new potential in their life, and eliminates the tragedy of people unnecessarily suffering and kind of feeling constrained and victimized and living in unnecessarily restricted and unpleasant ways. So, and to be able to do that is an absolute pleasure. It's a gift, to be able to simply and easily and enjoyably help people so much and to make a difference is an absolute pleasure. And that's why I do what I do. So hopefully we'll get to see you all in May.